Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us for part 3 of the Torah portion Re'eh. So we were discussing the mountains of Gerizim and Ebal, and particularly the area in between the two, this valley called Shechem, that means it's this idea of between the shoulders. And so mountains symbolically can represent shoulders or heads, as we see symbolically in a number of passages in the scripture. Strongholds and kingdoms, all of these ideas. And so we talked about Joseph and his connection to this place, Shechem. And when we look into the pages of the New Testament, like when we go into the book of John, chapter 4, one of the most famous passages that in the scripture is here. And a lot of you have heard probably sermons or references to this. Often it's referred to as the woman at the well. And so what we see in John chapter 4 there is that Yeshua has departed in verse 3. He left Judea and departed again unto Galilee, and he must need to go through Samaria. Okay, and so he's leaving Judea, or what the land of Israel after the time of Solomon was divided into two different kingdoms, very much like what happened in these United States during the time of the Civil War. We had the North and the South at war with one another. Same kind of thing happened here, that they were actually at war with each other at times. And so the northern kingdom was known as the house of Israel, and the southern kingdom as the house of Judah. And the northern kingdom consisted of the 10 tribes mainly, and the southern kingdom of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and Levites scattered among both of those. Well, it's a long story, and it's a whole teaching in itself, but they ended up splitting after Solomon. Solomon's son, during the reign of Rehoboam, partly because of oppressive taxes, the northern kingdom split off from that southern kingdom. And this happened in the place of Shechem, was the town that this happened, where this division occurred. Well, so they sort of lived independently for a while, but ultimately the northern kingdom, which is the house of Israel, it's also at times just called Israel. Sometimes the word Israel is used to refer to the entire kingdom. Sometimes it just means the northern kingdom. Sometimes it is referred to as Ephraim, and sometimes it is referred to as Samaria, because Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom, Jerusalem the capital of the southern kingdom. Okay, so now it's all beginning to kind of become clear. A lot of these pieces are coming together. So the northern kingdom was taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and then later on the Assyrians took some of those people, a hodgepodge of different folks that had been taken, and they transplanted them to this area of Samaria. So you get the idea, and basically this passage shows us and tells us that the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along. The Jews did not think much of the Samaritans at all. These were a mixed people. And so there's a whole lot of interesting details in this passage, because it says that Yeshua needed to go through Samaria. And again, Samaria is this place where all of these mixed people, Israelites and other nations that they had intermarried and mixed with, were all placed there. And Samaria was the capital of the house of Israel, or that northern kingdom, Ephraim. And it says, then he came to a city of Samaria which is called Sychar. Now Sychar is basically in the same area and synonymous with Shechem. Sakar means, it has this meaning of wine as in drunkenness connected with idolatry. Somebody who's not sober of mind and has gotten off into these mixtures, unholy mixtures and idolatry here. And so he goes out, it says in furthermore here, he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar. Interestingly, Sychar or Shikar, meaning wine, sounds the same as the word shikar that means false or a lie. It's spelled differently. It's, what do you call that? A homophone that, nothing to do with, oh, never mind. I don't want to say anything off color there. But a homophone is words that sound the same, but they're different concepts. And so the word for wine, one of the words for wine, Sychar or Shikar, sounds like Shikar that means false or a lie, which I think is kind of interesting. And so that's where this is coming together at, near a parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. So as I said, Joseph inherited this, and more specifically his son Ephraim, because Ephraim ends up getting the birthright there. Now Jacob's well was there, so you got to go back and look at that, the history of that. Yeshua therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. And so it's around noon. This lady of Samaria comes out to draw water, and they have a conversation. I'm not going to go into all of it, although it's interesting, but you begin to see the differences in the you get a real sense of the culture, and that these people didn't get along, and it was a very unusual thing for a single Jewish man to be out there speaking to a woman of Samaria. These things are not done. That would have not been a proper thing for either culture. And she's pretty surprised that a Jewish man would speak to her and ask her for a drink of water. There's a lot involved in that. And she asked him, she said, furthermore, he says, if you knew the gift of God and he who spoke to you, you would ask of him, and he would give you of living water. And the lady responds, and sir, you don't have anything to draw with, and the well is deep, and from where are you going to get that living water? And it's a pretty interesting thing to think about, because if you really look at this, how is she drawing her water? Does she not have a bucket to draw her water? Obviously, she didn't come out there without a bucket. She's drawing her water with a bucket, but she responds to him, how are you going to draw this living water? You don't even have a bucket. It doesn't make any sense to the modern Gentile Western mind, but it does in this culture, because any self-respecting Jew would not drink out of her bucket. He would have his own bucket to drink out of, or not drink anything at all, because it would be common if he were to drink out of that, in the way a lot of some of the Jews of that time, such as Peter, who was given the vision, and ultimately shown that he shouldn't call any man common or unclean. It's not just unclean, but common or unclean that God had made clean. And so that's what they for example, maybe you have a sheep that is a clean animal, and even an animal that could be, if it doesn't have a blemish, would be acceptable for a sacrifice, for a korban. However, imagine if some pig went out there and got near and rubbed up against the sheep, and maybe got dirt or parasites off the pig, got on the sheep. Then, even though the sheep is a clean animal, it would have become common and no longer holy, no longer set apart. So this is the way the people thought about Gentiles in general. And even in this Torah portion, it goes in and revisits the idea of clean and unclean meats. And a lot of these concepts, tend to all begin to connect. So he offers her this living water, and then he says, go get your husband. Go call your husband. And the lady says, I don't have a husband. Exactly. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Yeshua said to her, you've said correctly or well, I have no husband, for you've had 5 husbands, and the guy you're with now, he that's with you, is not your husband. In that you've been honest, or you've spoken truthfully. And so there's so much going on with that, because there were basically 7 major nations that ruled over the people of Israel. I mentioned Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Media, Persia, Empire. Ends up being like 7 of those. And also, there are 7 main inhabitants of the land of Israel that they are to go in and possess. All of these various types of Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And so all of these 7 ites here were part of that land. These are symbolic of spiritual strongholds. Mary Magdalene, who I believe to be an archetypal bride picture, it says that Yeshua cast out 7 devils of her. So there's a connection between the idea of the bride, the woman, and the land. There's a connection between the idea of the Sabbath and the land, because the land is talked about when you go in and possess the land and God gives you rest from all your enemies around about. When you conquer your enemies and you possess the land or your soul, Luke says, with patience possess your soul. And that is the whole idea of salvation, a big topic in itself. But you're to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You have to go in and possess your soul. And so, and God gives you the tools to do that. He gives you, provides for you the armor and the ability and all of that to do that, and has made provision. But, the people they had to take sword in hand and go in there and remove these giants, which sometime we'll go into more, the giants and the people of the land, go in and talk about this in more detail, about the different types of spiritual strongholds that they represent. And so anyway, it says that, you're living with a guy now. You've got a guy who's not your legitimate husband, but you've had 5 husbands besides him. And so we see that it's interesting, in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, we have the same kind of concept going on. It says that he wants somebody to be sent back from the grave to warn his 5 brothers. He's an archetypal picture here, this rich man, of these world empires or rulers that are strongholds that are against the people of God. You might remember the Sadducees, who did not believe in the resurrection or in angels. They gave Yeshua this scenario and say this lady's married to a husband and he dies, and then she marries his brother and he dies, and she marries all 7 of these guys. Likewise, in the book of Revelation chapter 17, and talking about the 7 mountains upon which the woman or the whore sits, it says 5 are fallen, 1 is, and 1 is to come. You've had 5 husbands, you're with a guy now, there's another one to come. So this lady here is an archetypal picture of the people of Israel. And real quickly, she wants to know, she has a theological question for Yeshua. She wants to know who's right. And it's pretty humble of her that she would ask this Jewish rabbi who's right, because she says in verse 21, after this issue of dealing with the 5 husbands, and I tied in a number of verses with that, she says to him, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. I see, Ra'eh, that you're a prophet, a seer. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain. What mountain is she talking about? She's a Samaritan, and this is Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing. They made a whole religion about blessing, a prosperity gospel, essentially. And these people were very expressive, from what I understand, in their worship, but not much truth. They changed the scriptures to say Mount Gerizim rather than Jerusalem. This is her question to him. She said, our fathers worshipped in this mountain, Mount Gerizim, and you say, that is, you Jews say, that Jerusalem is the place in where men ought to worship. And Yeshua said, woman, believe me, the hour comes when you shall neither worship in this mountain nor at Jerusalem worship the Father. Because both of those, there's a temple on Mount Gerizim at this time that she's speaking, and there's a temple in Jerusalem. And both of those temples are going to be destroyed. So in other words, there's coming a point pretty quickly, lady, when people won't be worshiping God either place, because it's going to be both of them are going to be destroyed. Interestingly, in our Torah portion, after talking about the Mount of Blessing and Curses, it goes into where things are to be done, the place that the Lord will choose. And so this is a lot of the issue, the theological issue going on there. And so he said, you worship you know not what. She asked him a sincere question, and it sounds kind of insulting, a kind of a harsh response. He says, you people don't have the truth. You don't even know what you're worshiping. We know what we worship. The Jews know what we worship. For salvation is of the Jews. Ask your pastor. Ask a pastor sometime. Pastor, do you believe salvation is of the Jews? And see what they say. See if they agree with Yeshua. If they don't, they probably won't even know that he said this. But even they probably don't agree with it at all, even though they wouldn't want to out and out contradict him. So basically, when you look at this, he goes on to say that God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in both spirit and in truth. And so basically, a beautiful picture is seen here, to where he is showing that there is going to be an integration of Jew and Gentile, of the house of Israel and the house of Judah, all of these things being reconnected, even though they are cuttings, they had been cut off, Gerizim. Wherefore you in times past, being Gentiles in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision made with hands, at that time you were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, being strangers to the covenants of promise. In other words, you were cut off in the past, and you were just a Gentile, separated from God, God's people, and God's covenants. But now you who were sometimes cut off or far away have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. And you can read that in Ephesians 2. That's a little bit about this, and there's much more to say that I didn't have time to get to today. But I hope that I've given you some things to think about in regards to this passage of the New Testament in this Torah portion, Re'eh, in the book of Deuteronomy. Be sure and comment if you have anything. Click subscribe, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate about emailing me. I'll be, I try to get back with everyone that emails me. Thanks a lot. Shabbat Shalom. Take care.